Any questions on what I just read? Sweet. With that, the next piece is roll call. Gary Baca? Here. Courtney Barnett?
Here.
Pavel, help me.
Pinchak.
See, I'm going to get
Here.
that. Thank you. I'm the chair, Mark Curtis. I'm here. Dan Nichols? Not present. Craig Sterling?
Here.
Michael Wiseman?
Here.
And with us this evening also is Town Attorney Mark Bauer and Code Enforcement Officer Scott Dvorak. With that, we will get started. We'll ask the applicant to step to the podium and walk us through where you're at. Make sure you please introduce yourself and thank you.
Brian Garrity. My address is 50 Wagner Farm Road here in Gorham.
Thank you, Brian.
How you doing?
My name is Mark Rossi, 10 Elizabeth Road, Biddeford, and I'm Brian's partner on this project. And I'd like to say thank you for taking your time out of your busy day to address this situation. It is appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you. So we have the application, but if you could walk us through it. We kind of started this, but
Yep.
we're back. So,
Yeah. Thanks for doing it so quickly to get us back here. I
Yes,
appreciate
thank
that
you.
too. So I came in to the office to ask some questions on 42 Middle Gym, which is another property that we're developing over there. One of the questions was an issue with the wetlands, bringing our underground power through. I think I submitted all the paperwork with that. I got in touch with the DEP, they sent me an email back, and I conveyed with Scott, sent him the emails, and we agreed that I was within compliance for that. Then I asked about the setback lines on 42 from Kayla's Way. Now, the information that I thought I was getting, or what I heard, was that the setback was 50 feet from Kayla's Way and also from Middle Jam Road, as they were the same road classification. So now, as far as 32 Middle Jam, that was originally approved for a duplex and set, I think it was 175 feet from Middle Jam Road. After speaking with the town on that, I thought that, what they were saying was Middle Jam Road, same road classification, 50 feet from the road is your setback. I went, an additional 20 feet, thinking I would leave a 10 to 15 foot buffer. And that's basically where we're at.
Okay. And so at some point during this process, it was noted that you didn't meet the exact setback that's required in the area?
Scott had called me, with some concerns and asked me to get a survey. So I did, and the surveyor came out and said, according to this, you're 2 feet in with the foundation to the setback.
Anybody from the board with questions for the appellant?
Yeah.
Okay.
So let's see. On attachment A4, are you there?
Yes.
So, several lines down there, it says include a set of plans, and in parentheses is the plot plan. And that was dated 6/5/24. So my question is, did you review attachment A6, which is from DM Roma, dated 7/6/22, that was approved by the planning board?
I did.
And so looking at that, the setback is delineated from the property line very clearly. Am I correct?
Yes.
So my question is, did you at some point question Roma about that setback distance? Did you dispute it?
I did not. I thought that the information I got when I came to the town that day was that the setback from the road was 50 feet because of the road classification.
And what day did you come to the town for that information?
I don't,
It was before we ever started any foundation work or anything of that
no, it
nature.
wasn't.
Was it?
No, it wasn't. It was,
Was-
it,
was
well, it
that-
was before. Yes, it was before. I'm sorry. Yeah, I mean, it was before we poured the foundation for that specific lot.
Because if we would have known, we would have made sure that it was within the setbacks of what the town, your municipality requires. Believe me.
So, yes, I'm still asking, did you not trust DM Roma?
It's not that I didn't trust them, it's that when I came in to ask what the setbacks were, I got that information, so that's what I went with. I thought it was 50 feet. I didn't even think to call DM Roma, honestly.
But this plan that was approved by the Planning Council is dated 7/6/22.
Yep.
That's almost
So-
2 years before you started the foundation.
We bought the property, it was already in a package. So Fieldings Oil owned it before us, and it had all gone through planning prior to us purchasing the property.
Yes, so we did not know that that was the case.
You what?
We did not know that that was the case because we purchased the property from Fieldings.
Okay. But when you filled out the building permit, where it says include a set of plans, including the plot plan, I assume
We
you read
used-
that.
Yes, we used what we had gotten from the purchase.
And
Okay.
I believe that the original plan was for a duplex and not a single-family home that you had been approved. So instead of putting a duplex in there, we chose to use a single-family home to keep the neighborhood enhanced in the right way.
Right, but again, my question is, whether it was a duplex or a threeplex or whatever, how would the setback be any different from what's delineated on the plan?
Again, I went by the conversation that I had with the town that day.
Okay.
Greg, if I may for just a second.
Yeah.
Just so essentially, I think what I'm hearing you say, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, is that you had a plan that was
Correct.
approved by the planning board, but was run through by a previous owner.
Yep.
And then you came in to ask some questions, and you felt like you received information. You didn't know that, did you know that it was different, or did you think it was the
I
same?
really honestly didn't. I
Okay.
thought that it was, I mean, if
You thought they answered you thought that what was depicted on the plan and what they answered were essentially the same thing?
Right,
Okay.
right.
So-
I mean, at 50 feet, I mean, I didn't scale it or anything. I mean, it's close to where
Yep.
it should be,
Sure.
so.
So not noticing a giant disparity, you didn't go through
No.
a giant, okay.
No.
Okay. And
All right,
hopefully that just helps his thought process, that's what I was hearing, but go ahead, is there more?
Okay.
Yeah.
So a follow-up question is, let's see, on the other plan, it says 5, in bold letters, it says verify accurate property lines prior to construction to assure setbacks. Did you look at that?
Did I look at it or did I do that? I'm sure I did, yes. I mean,
Okay.
again, having that conversation with them, I thought I was well within where I needed to be with more room than I needed.
Okay, next question. Have you been a builder? Do you have experience?
This is my first development.
Okay. And my final question for the moment is, two more questions. Were there boundary markers at the front property lines in
No.
place before you began excavation?
No,
Nothing at all?
no, I mean, the markers were, down the property lines on the sides. There was nothing no setback markers or anything like that.
So the front corner was not marked?
The pins were marked on the property lines, but not the setback.
Okay, so, so if the property corners, I know the one below towards the easement is not a corner, but there's a survey mark there. So if stakes had been driven or pins at those 2 points, and you had pulled a line between them, you would have had the setback, you would have had the property line, correct?
Yeah, I mean, there was never a stake at that, where that, it's showing the property line on here. It was just to show kind of where it went back. It wasn't in this spot.
Well, I thought you said there were pins.
Well, there was a marker, but it was down towards the road more, just showing that line going back towards the drainage pond. There was no marker on that specific spot that I saw anywhere.
Okay, but do you agree that had this been surveyed? Looks like it had.
It'd been surveyed by the previous owner, yes.
So wouldn't it have been pretty simple to find those 2 points and and pull a line between them?
Yep,
And then measure 50 feet from there?
probably, yes.
Okay.
Yes, sir. We made a mistake.
And one more question. Do you have a written or recorded recording detailing the conversation you had with planning and code?
Oh, no.
I wish I had, but no.
No, we're.
So you have no evidence to
No, sir.
support your claims?
Our word against theirs at this
Okay.
point, I suppose,
Yeah,
yes.
and that, you know, we.
And listen, can I say something real quick? I really try to stay in compliance with the town all the time, and I'm sure these guys, even if we can't agree on this, will attest that I ask a lot of questions. If they ask me to do something, I try to get it done as promptly as possible, send pictures, ask if there's anything else I need to do. I mean, I'm not trying to pull the wool over anybody. I really thought that we were all good. I mean,
Yeah, no, I'm
thought-
just trying to establish
Yeah.
what we need in order to
sir.
make an informed
Yeah,
decision.
we have a very well-oiled and working relationship with your building department as we're doing everything. We're right on what they asked, and everything is done,
Okay,
to the T.
Thank you.
that's all I have for now.
Other questions from the board?
Why did you guys decide to not use the proposed building location?
Again, it was originally approved for a duplex, and
Well, on here it says 4-bedroom dwelling, so was it
well, that's the septic design, I think, that is. It was a 175-foot driveway to the house. I didn't think we needed a 175-foot driveway. The footprint of the house got smaller as we went to a single family, so we were able to move it up and still be within the setback lines, so I thought. I mean, we're good on both sides and the rear. It's the front that, we went over a little.
And like I said, it wasn't done on purpose, it was just a human error.
Who was the excavator that you used?
The excavation company, it was EPM. Is that a Dayton?
Eric's Property Maintenance. Good man.
Other questions from the board? I do have a few questions. So it sounds to me like, the first question I have, and I think it's a fairly obvious question, but I'd like it on the record. Is there any monetary gain for you to be 2 feet closer to the road or 2 feet further from the road? Is there any difference? I mean, I get that 175 feet, obviously the driveway's more expensive, but 5 feet one way or the other, does that make any monetary difference?
Not in the building, no.
Right.
It will make a monetary difference if we have to go in and demolish it.
Right.
Then it's gonna cost us some money.
Right.
And
And I guess
you
what
know,
I'm getting at is, I completely believe you, and I believe
Yes,
the rest
sir.
of the board does, that this is a mistake
an
that was made.
honest mistake.
It wasn't done in order to gain something.
Right.
No.
Right, there wasn't any advantage, I mean, and that's one of those things that anybody who's looking at this, I think, but I don't want to speak for the rest of the board, that's what I see, is that I see a mistake. Now, whether or not we can get to a point where, You either have to tear it out or you don't. I don't know. We're gonna walk down that road. I get a little concerned. I've dealt with town offices, code enforcement offices, planners for decades at this point. And it seems to me what you're essentially saying here is that you relied on a discussion rather than the written documents, so to speak, right? And I can understand that, and I definitely understand Mr. Sterling's point that, you don't have a recording, you don't have a written statement or anything like that. But I want to be very clear about something, or I'd like you to be very clear about something. Is it your contention that somebody in that meeting on that day specifically told you that it was 50, it was, the setback was measured from the edge of the pavement? Or do you think you misunderstood or misapplied that information?
I think there had to have been a misunderstanding
Okay.
there at some point in the conversation. What I took from it was that particular road classification was a 50-foot setback from the road.
Sure.
I don't remember hearing anything about, us talking about the property line specifically. I heard that, I went an extra 20 feet, thinking, give myself a little buffer.
Yep.
And that's,
And I can understand that misunderstanding. The other thing I'd like to be crystal clear on, do you recall who was at that meeting with you? Who else was in that room?
it was Miles and, sorry,
Damon?
David, sorry, yeah, David.
Okay. And the reason I ask that is because most of the things that we've received just say staff.
Yep.
It's a small pet peeve of mine. I like to
mean,
know who I'm talking with and about.
I ask a lot of questions.
Sure.
I try not to do anything without at least getting their opinion or input, or if I don't quite understand something, the clarification.
Yep. Go to the expert.
Go to the expert, right?
Appreciate that.
And that's what we did.
Sure.
And as our sir over there said, we didn't ever think to bring no recording or nothing or like that, you know what I'm saying? It's, I believe, on honesty and everything. So it would have looked weird if we come in there with a tape recorder or something, or,
Yeah.
We're trying to work with everybody and make everything good for everyone.
Sure.
That's our goal here, and we're extremely sorry for this. I mean, we're hoping that you'll see that it was an honest mistake. And we learned a lesson. Believe
Yeah, I
me,
don't think that
everything else is,
anybody-
I got on them, and everything is now pinned by GPS and
Sure.
everything. My word.
I'll give you two unsolicited pieces of advice. First, yes, you're right, the recorder would look odd. I will tell you, anytime I've ever received a piece of information from a town or somebody that I was like, I don't know if that's exactly, or I just want to make sure that we're putting it in the right place, I'll sit down and type an email. Hey, just want to follow up on our conversation. This is what I understood the conversation to be. Give them an opportunity to restate what I've said. That's one piece of advice. And then the setbacks, it was more of a question. You mentioned the excavation contractor, and I don't necessarily care to name them by any means, but somebody decided to put it there. Did you put the, did you put the stake in the ground and say the house is going here, or did the
I think-
excavating contractor, or was it a combination?
We measured everything together, me and him. I mean, we
Wait,
measured
can you
all-
get to the microphone, please? I can't, I
That
didn't
pole-
hear.
yeah.
We measured everything together,
Okay.
yeah.
Any other questions from the board?
Got one right there.
And this is just to make the record clear, is there anything that makes, other than the cost of moving the foundation, is there anything about the nature, the character of the lot that makes it impossible to move the foundation back? Is there a wetland or anything back there?
So there is a stream and some wetlands that come into the property. If the house is set back 175 feet and your driveway is coming right up to it, I mean, you're gonna have like a little piece. You can see where the wetland comes across there. I just feel like it would eat up a lot of the property, putting it 175 feet back. Your driveway's going that far through the property.
Yeah.
I would rather not have that long of a driveway if I was buying the property.
I guess my question is it physically possible to move the foundation back another 3 feet? Or is that impossible due to the characteristics of the site?
I'm trying to we're looking into that right now. Part of the problem is the wall that separates the garage from the house, that foundation wall, is not straight. It jogs a couple times. So I don't know how we would actually cut, 3 feet off the front and 3 feet off the back and move it like that. I don't think it's gonna be that simple. I think what would probably end up happening is we'd either have to take out that whole wall, and then at that point, if it's not structurally sound enough, we'd have to take the whole thing down and move it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions for the applicant? Thank you. We'll now ask
Thank you.
anybody else.
Thank
And
you.
we may have you come back up to answer other questions, but thank you for your... So I know the statement that I read earlier really said opponents, but this is really an opportunity for anybody from the public, for or against, with any additional information, to come up to the podium and speak. So with that, I guess I'll call it the public hearing. So the public hearing is now open, if anybody else would like to speak on this subject.
My name is Erwin Novak. I'm retired professor of geology, 44 years at the University of Southern Maine. I have written and published extensively on the bedrock and superficial geology of the Presumpscot River corridor. I live at 82 Middle Jam Road. I also find it difficult to comprehend that Kayla Way and Middle Jam would be conflated as to being the same setback. That's an aside. I happen to be a certified geologist. I was a licensed site evaluator for 20-something years, but I gave it up since I had never been sued or called in by the state. I figured it was time to give it up. But I am a member of the Board of Certification of Geologists and Soil Scientists for the state of Maine. Appointed by former governors. I'm embarrassed to have to say all that. And I did write a note here that I dislike being characterized as an opponent. I better be considered as an information provider.
Absolutely, which is why I restated it.
I
I'm reading the document as it's given to me, but I wanted to make sure that everybody knew. You didn't have to be against it to speak.
I appreciate it. And I have to say that I feel for the applicants, very much so. And I'm looking at, I didn't, and I should have, thinking there was an overhead projector like there was in my classrooms, and I should have prepared multiple copies to share with you. But if you use attachment number 5, you see that there is on the adjacent lot a proposed retention basin. Now, I don't know, has that been built or not? That's good to hear.
So just for the record, because he's not at the mic, it was built by the previous landowner? Okay, thank you.
Right, okay.
Appreciate that. I just want to make sure it's on the record.
That's an important factor, I think, for people to know. But we're still concerned about runoff because in the previous owner's preparation, which, by the way, I have a half-inch thick file about that, there were soil maps produced, and unfortunately, I just learned now that I should have done my homework and made multiple copies of the soil map so you could see it. But in the vicinity of this particular property is the worst, let's say the least, or the not best soil for septic system disposal. I assume that the septic system test pit that's shown on the applicant page 8, attachment 5, is the one that's going to still be used, or else a new one has to be dug someplace on the property. And I think that matters because the soil that is in that vicinity, because it's so close to the marsh, is called scantic soils, which is said to be limited, severe, and very severe for most community and recreational uses, principally because of the high water table, and it's suitable for wetland habitats. So it's right on the fringe, and I know these maps from experience can be a little bit off here, one way or the other. So that is a concern. So I'm mostly concerned about the runoff because of the potential getting into the Presumpscot drainage, which is Class A water, the only water, same as Sebago Lake, before you hit Dundee and head south. So some amelioration situations to prevent any runoff, contaminated runoff, is what's my main concern. And perhaps, and I'm not an engineer, perhaps there are engineering solutions, such as, and I don't know if this exists, if you visit the site now, the foundation perimeter is full of water. And I don't know where that water is planned to go. Then there's going to be water coming off the roof and the driveway. Now, if the water from the surrounding foundation could be maybe pumped, I assume the septic system is going to have to be pumped to wherever it's going to go. Maybe the surrounding water accumulating on the foundation could be pumped to the retention pond.
Could I ask a quick question? So I appreciate all the information and the questions that you're bringing out, but just so we're clear, the purview of this board is simply the appeal. Any conditions of
remediation.
Yeah, anything like that wouldn't really be up. And I don't want to cut you short if there's something that you're getting to that does affect, whether or not this setback changes or not. And I guess maybe that's the simplest question. Do you have a concern with the house being 2 feet too close to the road? Is there a particular,
Because, yes,
Okay.
because of runoff.
Yep.
But if that could be addressed,
Yep.
I would have a less of a concern.
Okay.
Without causing great harm to the applicants, because I feel for them. So lastly, I just wanted to say that I have great respect for the predicament and for the Solomon-like decision that you guys have to make.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I have a quick question for you.
Yeah.
If we were able to magically pick up the foundation and move it back 2 feet, would that change anything? Runoff-wise?
Well, the runoff conditions on the property, I think, will remain the same. And of course, they're going to be increased by the roof and the driveway, as if nothing was
Because
done.
it can't drain through
Right.
that.
But I'm trying to be feeling.
Yep. Amenable. Yep. Appreciate that. Are there any other questions from the board? Thank you. It seems like there was a particular question that I wouldn't mind having answered if the applicant would step back to the podium, just on that particular subject. So the plot plan that was submitted originally was essentially part of the leach bed plan, the septic design plan. Is there a new septic design that has been submitted since the house has moved much closer to the road? Or is the septic going in the exact same place?
I think it's going to go in the same spot
Okay.
because of what he had talked about. I mean, the septic designer said this is the
That's the
spot you want to
right.
put it.
So there'll be a pump
There's
system
going
to
to have
pump?
to be
Yep,
a
sure.
pump for that.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
And again, that building was scheduled to be a duplex, so there would have been a much more runoff from it because it would have been a bigger building.
Sure.
So the footprint of the building is smaller now, so it would be less runoff. We're willing to work with you folks any way possible to make sure that the runoff and the clean water and everything is perfect. We don't want to do any problems or cause any problems for any contamination of drinking water or anything of that nature.
Sure.
And the reason why there's water and things into that foundation, the reason it is now is because we have a stop work order and the city told us you can't do nothing. And we abide by the law. Once that red tag was on there, That red tag sits and we don't touch nothing until we came to you guys to see if we could please work this out.
Sure. Do you expect to be able to put a positive drain in, or is it going to be a sump pump that will have to pump that water?
It'll be a sump pump.
Okay, all right.
And we can do that.
Oh, yeah, no, absolutely.
Honestly,
Happens every day.
We're doing them in every house because there's such a high water table
Sure.
there, you know?
Okay. Any other questions for the applicant?
I kind of got a
And,
question
and
for Scott,
also,
if I can-
to alert his concerns, when we do pump that out, we'll take a 200, 300-foot line, line out into the field, hook it up to the pump, and make sure none of that water goes into that tributary or anything of that.
There are standards to
that.
follow for all of
I
that.
listened to you, and I understand your concerns, and we want to be a good neighbor. I think you saw by the house that we built, and I met you before, that we did a good job there. And it's a nice young family that bought that home. They're out there playing in the yard today. When you left, we were over there. And we're trying to be good neighbors.
Yeah, we appreciate
So
that.
if that's part of the condition,
Yeah.
we can live with that.
No, that's perfect. Thank you.
Thank you.
Did you say you had a question for Scott?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that foundation as it exists is in the shoreland zone, correctly?
The 250, it's the less strict area compared to the 100 feet. So he's in between the 100 and the 250.
So it's out of the 100.
Yeah.
So what's the additional 150 supposed to be covering?
The 250 is mostly dealing with tree removal, and you're allowed to remove so many trees when they get into what they call the basal area. You can remove so much percentage of that lot. It's a lot more eased up compared to the first 100 feet.
Okay. Thank you.
And there was no concern with any tree removal, I assume?
Wasn't any there to begin
There you
with,
go.
so.
Problem solved. All right. Any other questions for anybody before we start just contemplating this as a board? Quick question for the town attorney. The criteria, would you mind helping the board just kind of walk through the criteria that we're supposed to be considering this under?
Wait, sorry, one
Yeah,
sec.
please.
Are we going to hear from Damon or the code officer?
Is there, we can absolutely ask to, is there, yeah, actually.
Miles is not here.
Right, so Miles is the one. So, great question, Craig, thank you, because that is very important. Now would be a great opportunity for either code or planning, if there's anything that you'd like to add that hasn't been added in. Is there, I guess we'll start with code. Scott, is there anything that you're?
I wasn't privy to the conversation at all, so
Okay.
I can't really
Yep.
state anything either way on that.
Perfect. So, then we'll move on to planning. Thank you for coming.
Hey, so I'm Damon Yakovlev, Assistant Town Planner.
Okay. Is there anything that you would like to add to any of the discussion before we get started?
So there is a statement that the code officer, Miles Hutchinson, and I put together, sort of responding to the information that was in the appeal, sort of clarifying our recollection of the conversation. And I can reiterate from my perspective up in the planning office. So the code officer, Miles, and the applicant came upstairs to ask a question about the setback from Kayla Way to the development they're working on at 42 Middle Jam. So we got the private way plan for Kayla Way and discussed what the setback would be, which is 50 feet, and showed applicant on the plans, how to measure that using the property lines. And that's really the extent of what the conversation was up in the planning office. I don't recall any discussion about measuring from edge of pavement. We would not state that that was the method to use, because the correct method is to use the property lines, and that's what I recall discussing with the applicant, specifically at that other location, 42 Middle Jam.
Thank you. Anything else from there?
I'm happy to answer any questions the board may have.
I have one, but does anybody else have a question?
I have one as well.
Go ahead.
Are there any circumstances under which it would be appropriate to measure setbacks from the edge of pavement, or is it always from the edge of the property line?
The property line would always be the gold standard. I mean, if it were the case that the property line was the edge of the pavement and it was marked as such, but that is not pretty much never the case. Usually there would be pins that would be used to measure that, or monuments. So that would be, what we'd always recommend. And if there aren't any, then a boundary survey may be requested by the code enforcement officer, and there's conditions under which that can be requested, and code enforcement can get more into that.
Thank you.
Greg?
Yeah, so I think this whole issue of what was discussed is going to be irrelevant to the appeal, but I just want to clarify, how many new home permits have you processed in Gorham, roughly?
That is a question the code enforcement office can answer. I don't have it off the top of my head. So in planning, we review the bigger projects, subdivision, site plans. We don't typically handle the individual home building permits for homes.
Okay, but how long have you been working in Gorham?
About 2 years now.
Okay. So have you ever encountered, well, I think you've just answered that. Has this question come up, kicked over from code, that that your department would have to clarify about pavement being the setback? I mean, I think you just said there could be an instance where the pavement went to the edge of the property line, but have you had any similar situations in 2 years?
I've not seen that. I'm not saying it couldn't ever be the case, but what we usually would see is there's a setback several feet to several dozens of feet from the actual edge of the pavement to where the actual property line, the end of the right-of-way would be. And that's what we would advise people to use. We also advise people not to use the town's GIS parcel lines as a reference for, say, determining setbacks. They're good for sort of conceptual use, but for really the gold standard is always going to be a boundary survey, and then using the pins that are located in the field. And it sounds like in this case there were pins that could have been used by the applicant, and had they asked me about that location, I would have said to use those pins. But again, just to be clear, we didn't discuss 32 Middle Jam, we were discussing 42 up in the planning office that day, which I believe was in mid-May. And just to clarify too, we don't have a recording of that conversation.
Right, okay. All I'm trying to get at is what's the likelihood of the contention that he was told the pavement is the point to make the measurement?
I would say 0%.
Yeah.
We're close to it.
Other questions? Mike? No? So I do have one quick question for you. You were in the meeting, the applicant was in the meeting, Miles was in the meeting. Do you recall suggesting at that meeting, either you or Miles, that they do a survey?
Again, the question wasn't about 32
Sure.
Middle Jam, so if they had asked that, I would have suggested it, but I don't recall any specific questions about a survey at 32 Middle Jam. Now at 42, it had already been surveyed, so there were pins to use because of it. Kayla Way had been constructed relatively recently, so there would have been pins to find in the field.
Okay. Any other questions?
I do have one. Go ahead,
I
Gary.
have a quick one. One fifth paragraph down the bottom, it says the distance of 47.8 feet from the setback instead of 50, that's a 2.2 feet issue, not?
That appears to be the case.
All right, that was it.
Is there another question? Say you had a question?
For Scott, quick question. They just passed an ordinance where you got to get a survey for what size minimum lot now?
I Well, it's always been on there that one of the requirements was for assertive. I think they've codified that in the ordinance, I think. Believe it. I haven't, like I said, I'm still learning, weeding my way through it yet,
Okay.
but I believe there is something in there.
There's a
that's
certain,
required.
under 60,000, I think, and then it can be requested for anything, but it's gonna be part of it, or it is part of it now.
Yeah, I mean, that wouldn't surprise me. A lot of towns are
Yeah,
doing that.
I understand.
Damon, you don't happen to know that answer, do you?
I believe it is 60,000 square feet.
Thank you. Any other questions before we let Damon sit down comfortably? Thank you, Damon.
All right. Thank you.
Okay. Oop. Absolutely. Thanks. Scott, I'd like you to pull your microphone closer to you.
Didn't think I was going to speak much, so
Yeah.
I apologize.
Yep, no worries. It's like the bat phone. All right, so I think we are now at the point where, if it's okay with the rest of the board, before we start anything else, I'd ask the town attorney to just give us a quick walkthrough on which criteria we're supposed to use for this particular.
Sure. Sure. This is a hardship variance request from the space standard. And so there are 4 criteria that the applicant has to meet, and the board has to be satisfied that the applicant has met his burden of proof on each of the 4. The first one is that the applicant has to show that the land in question cannot yield a reasonable return unless a variance is granted. I'll just provide a little bit of context for this one because honestly, the reasonable return one is usually the most important standard, and is the most problematic, I guess I would say, for most variances requests. Under Maine law, the failure to yield a reasonable return means that there's a practical loss of all beneficial use of the land without the variance. Maine courts have clarified that reasonable return as set forth in that undue hardship standard does not mean maximum return. And it says in order for land to yield a reasonable return, the appellant or applicant does not need to be accorded every conceivable opportunity to maximize his or her return or potential return when there's a legitimate zoning ordinance that says otherwise. However, Maine courts have upheld a finding of no reasonable return when an applicant could demonstrate the absence of any other beneficial use of a substandard lot. There is a case, Rowe versus City of South Portland, that's quite on point with the application, and I can get into that as if that would be useful as you're going through that criteria during your deliberations. But that dealt with a similar situation where a house had been constructed in South Portland, did not meet the setbacks. They went to get a certificate of occupancy. They were turned down because of the fact that it had been mislocated, and the city basically said you need to get a variance, and the variance was denied, and that was upheld on appeal because on the reasonable return standard. So that's maybe a point, a data point for the board to consider as it's going through its deliberations, and I can get more into the weeds on that case if you'd like. The second is that the need for the variance is due to the unique circumstances of the property and not to the general conditions of the neighborhood. So there's got to be something different about the lot that justifies a variance from a space standard that's not common to the rest of the neighborhood in that area. The third is that the granting of a variance will not alter the essential character of the locality. And then the last one is that the variance is not the result of an action taken by the applicant or a prior owner. So that's sometimes called the self-created hardship. For a hardship variance, it cannot be a self-created situation. So again, I sort of focused a little bit more on the first one with some of the case law and stuff, but if there's any questions on the other 3 criteria, just let me know. But again, remember that all 4 of those the board has to be satisfied that the applicant has met its burden on all 4 of those, and under your board rules or it's a majority for vote that would be needed for that.
So, going on recollection here on the format, we have to have a vote on each of these individually.
Right.
We have to have somebody, which means we have to have a motion on each of these individually. And typically what that means is, and I'm going to use an example, I'm going to take the easy one. Somebody could move that granting the variance will not alter the essential character of the locality because this is a residential home in a residential area and it is no closer to the road than other houses. Other houses are closer to the road than this particular home. They could make that motion. We could then, because you have to have the reasoning behind that in the motion, is that true?
Not in the,
No.
not in the motion.
Okay.
No.
All right.
You just have to need a motion and a second, and then you'd have discussion, deliberations on
Okay.
each of those standards.
So that's the
Yep.
shortest way to get there, is a motion and a second?
Yeah.
Okay. So you don't have to put the reason why you think it meets the standard or
No.
doesn't meet the standard in the motion?
No, you
Okay.
don't. And that's why and we touched on this a little bit in the training session, that a motion in the affirmative, in my view, is the best way to go about it. And it would be motion and second in the affirmative for each of the criteria, and then you would vote. If there's a motion or if there's a particular criteria where everybody thinks it wasn't met, you could, my recommendation would still be that you move and second in the affirmative, saying that the land in question cannot yield reasonable return, that then the vote would be, 0 in favor and 5 opposed, or whatever the case may be, in this situation.
You're still talking about four individual motions, and then, so it's
Yeah.
a single individual motion, a second discussion, and a vote?
Yes,
And then we move on to the next one?
Move on to the next one. And
Even
then-
if one of them fails, we do all four anyway, right?
Yes,
Okay.
exactly, because, if there were a further appeal from your decision, there would want to be, a record as to what was the sticking point for the particular one in question. At the end, you would then have a summary motion as to whether to grant or deny the variance based on what had led up to that, the 4 criteria.
Thank you.
Yep.
Before we get started, Scott, I know, well, maybe for the attorney as well, I mean, are there any other solutions available? I know, like legally or town, I mean, like, if it's granted, they move forward, right?
Right.
If it's not granted, the only option that I am envisioning right now is that they have to move, they have to meet that setback.
Right.
Is there any other option outside that you're aware of? Like, I know there's been a notice of no action kind of thing that, I mean, I know,
Yeah, I'm not gonna
okay,
weed into that one, but
okay.
to me, it's either you allow it, for me, it's either you allow it or you don't.
Okay. So
And at that point, we work something out with the applicant as to
what
how
the
we
solution is? Okay, all right. So we don't need to get into those weeds then. So I guess I'd entertain a motion at this point.
Can they be in any order?
They can be in any order as long as, I mean, we might as well
Mark
take them in order,
wanted
but
to
it
do the
doesn't matter to
easy
me.
ones
That's what I was
first.
gonna say.
He wants to do the easy ones
Yeah,
first.
well, that's fine. Let's hit an easy one first, and let's get going downhill. How's that?
So I would make a motion that granting of the variance will not alter the essential character of the property.
Okay. We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
Seconded. Discussion?
Can you restate that again?
Sure. Yep.
Which one are we doing?
We're on the third one down, which is that granting of a variance will not alter the essential character of the locality.
Okay, so I thought, thank you.
Any discussion on that? I will add the discussion that essentially, as I said in the example, you drive down Middle Jam Road, there are definitely houses that are closer than this particular foundation to the road. Now, those have been in existence for a long, long time, so that's got nothing to do with this particular appeal, but because they exist that way, it's my belief that allowing this would not alter the essential character of the neighborhood or the locality.
2.2 feet.
Right. Any further discussion? All in favor? 1, 2, 3, 4. Was that a, yes? Yeah, you got that? Good. So, one down. I'll entertain a second motion.
I'll move to find that the hardship is not the result of action taken by the applicant or of a prior owner.
Second?
Second.
There we go. Court. Thank you. Discussion?
So I'll discuss it. I think this one is really close, and I understand that there was a misunderstanding. It seems as though there was a lot of evidence, however, that this property line was measured that the setback is measured from the property line and not from the edge of the road. And so for that reason, I have to vote against this motion.
Further discussion?
Yeah, to me, it's not, there's no question at all. There are just so many scenarios in which this never needed to be questioned to the code office or planning. The documentation was there. As I mentioned earlier, driving a couple stakes in at the survey points or calling the surveyor and having him come out and do that, and then measuring from that point 50 feet or a little more if you want to be safe. The burden is on the owner, and in this case, the builder, acting on behalf of the owner, right? That's your responsibility. There's no, you know, and the conversation that's referenced to me has, first of all, it came too late. I think the Miles, in the memo, it said whenever there's a change of plans, you need to go back to the code office and say, we want to make an adjustment to what's been approved, and get their review and endorsement. And so that's the discussion that should have had, and I can't imagine there's nothing being discussed in town or other towns or anywhere about let's change the standard that setbacks are measured from anything other than the property boundary.
I agree with you. I think I understand where you're coming from.
And so unfortunately, the hardship was created by the applicant, and yeah, they have not met this criteria.
Scott, for education of the board here a little bit, I believe I know the answer to this, but I want to make sure we're clear. When code officers go to a site for an inspection, do they check the setback? Do you pull a tape or do anything?
No, they won't pull a tape.
Right.
Been told not to do that.
No,
Because I'm not a surveyor.
Correct.
However, if we do see a change or something like that, usually what happens, if you go out there, you do the inspection, you come back and record your inspections, and you look through the folder, that's when you see that there might be, that's not what I saw.
Right. So if a foundation, especially by the scale that we're looking at, if they had moved that foundation 5 feet in one direction or another, it probably wouldn't have sparked any thought in anybody's, right? I mean, unless it really looked like it was really too close to something, right?
The only concern we had on that one were the wetlands were marked, so we stayed away from those.
Right. So you don't pull a tape because that's, obviously you're not looking to pull that liability.
No.
Right. And so I do understand where you're coming with, Craig. I mean, I've sat on these, and this is the hardest one in a lot of ways. The other one will be the reasonable return one. The attorney laid that one out as well. But unfortunately, you know, there is action by the current owner that has impacted this. And so, you know, I know my experience has been, if there was a surveyor's mistake, if they did hire a surveyor and a surveyor came out and did something and laid it out and their instrument was off or something was wrong with that, that's not an action of the current owner, that's an action of somebody they hired. And if there's a mistake and they testify to that mistake, then it's much easier to meet this criteria. In this case, you know, we did ask, you know, how did it end up where it is? I worked with the earthwork contractor, we both, you know, picked a spot and put it there. And then the action to move it from one to the other, that makes it very difficult to vote in the affirmative for this particular motion. I agree. Is there any other discussion from anybody else on this one?
The only other thing I would say is, I read the summary that I think Mark, the attorney, was referring to. And when that variance was overturned, the cost to remedy the situation was not a factor.
Sure.
Because the lot was considered still usable.
Right, and that's more of the reasonable return criteria, is that what you're thinking of, or?
Well, I'm just saying, this is part of that. I disagree. It's not in our purview to try and bring some relief to the applicant. It's just to follow the code and see if there's a legal basis for a variance.
Sure.
And, you know, whether it's 6 feet or 2.5 feet or whatever, or the house was fully built, to me, it makes no difference. It's the burden is on the owner to meet the ordinance. Yeah.
Understood. So the motion in front of us is that the hardship is not the result of the action taken by the applicant or a prior owner. We've had some discussion. Is there any further discussion before we call a vote? Seeing none. All in favor that this is not as the result of the action of the current owner or prior owner? All opposed? The 5, did you vote on the first one or the second one? Are you recusing yourself from that particular vote? You're at a toss-up?
I'm annoyed.
Oh, you're annoyed, okay. I understand.
If you need me to vote, I'll vote yes.
Okay. All right, well, I think we should record a vote. So going back, you're in favor of that
Right.
they've met that criteria?
Yeah.
Okay, so it's 5-1 at this point. That's the second motion. We need a third.
A motion that the land in question cannot yield a reasonable return unless a variance is granted.
Second.
All right, so a second. You know, you all set with, right here. Pavel. Thank you. So we have a motion and a second. Discussion on this particular item? This is always one to wrestle with, attorney. I mean,
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up on what Craig was saying earlier. The discussion that in that Roe City of South Portland case was sort of centered around this criteria of, you know, whether the repair costs or the remedy should play into the reasonable return, and the court said no. The court said basically the costs in that case, they had to relocate an entire built house, or that was what they were faced with. They said the costs, even if prohibitive, were not construction costs caused by restrictions in the ordinance. They are reconstruction costs caused by human error in the construction of a building that could have conformed to the zoning requirements. So it's sort of looking to, you know, is the reasonable return, and I think it's related to the self-created hardship, but it's sort of, is the reasonable return the result of the ordinance restriction, or is the result of the error that was committed? And so to the extent that there, you know, I think the board will want to take that into consideration and make sure you're focused on the real issue, which is, can the land itself yield a reasonable return without a variance? You know, kind of pretended it was never put there in the first place? Can it be situated in such a location that it could yield a reasonable return without a variance from the setback requirement? So just wanted to mention that because it was referenced before, and the two kind of are interrelated, but at least in that South Portland case, it was more focused on the reasonable return criteria that you're now considering.
Thank you. Further discussion from the board?
I'll say a few words.
Please.
I'll be honest, gentlemen, I hate what we've got to do up here, okay? I do not love what these votes mean when we're talking about 2.2 feet, right? I'm fully there with you. When I look at the statute that it's my job to apply, it's kind of hard for me to come to any other conclusion. And the reason for that is we know that the land can create a reasonable return because there's already been another approved plan to have the building sited in a different location that met code that would make it marketable. And I think that decision to move the home, and I understand why you did it, right? But that decision to move the home was perhaps too rushed. But because of the existence of an alternative plan for that property that has been approved, I can't vote that this has been in the affirmative on this one. I'm sorry.
Thank you. Any other comments?
Yeah, I'm ditto on that because the one approved by the planning board was a duplex farther back, so it looks like the lot has plenty of possibility.
Sure. I would only add, not discounting either of your opinions, I guess I get frustrated as well, right? Very frustrated because in the end, we're talking about 2.2 feet. That's too close to a line. I guarantee when you drive by this place, if they built the house, you would never know. It would be hidden on a piece of paper somewhere. And so it does get very frustrating to sit up here. The previous one that we voted on, the wording is so very clear to me that I don't know how I couldn't vote against that one. This one, I believe, leaves, when they use the word reasonable, what's reasonable to you or reasonable to Scott or reasonable to the attorney and reasonable to me, I think there's room for interpretation there. I can tell you that I will vote to support this one. But because I think that causing to have to move this particular foundation 2.2 feet to meet, and granted, it's a legal standard. I'm 100% in agreement that a setback is needed and important in the whole 9 yards. But at some point, we got to look at whether or not it passes that kind of straight face test and kind of the difference that it'll really make. If we had, a neighbor here or somebody who was protecting the river standing there and saying, I'm telling you right now, 2.2 feet with the runoff off the top of that roof, that's going to kill the bass or the fish or the frogs or something like that, I'd say, yeah, it's got to go. But I don't think it's going to make any difference at all. So for me, personally, that one is easier because I believe the word reasonable grants us a certain amount of leeway in that one. So that's my particular opinion. Any other discussion before we have a vote?
Just one more thing. So, the problem with this case is that a mistake got made, and the question that we're really trying to answer today is who has to bear the risk of that mistake? Because if we grant the variance, then it's the builder who made the mistake that has to grant the risk. If we don't grant the variance, or I'm sorry, if we do grant the variance, then it's the town that has to bear the risk of that mistake. Because if somebody sues the variance and challenges it, it's the town that has to pay the legal fees and that has to go and defend. And so I've got all the sympathy in the world. I think this is dumb. But at the end of the day, I can't put the risk of that mistake on the town. I unfortunately have to keep the cost of that risk where the mistake was made.
By that same token, if we decide against it and they sue the town's going to defend itself anyway.
Sure.
It's going to cost somebody something somewhere. So I appreciate the thought process. Further discussion? All in favor that the land in question cannot yield a reasonable return unless a variance is granted. 2. All opposed? 4. And the final, or of the criteria, the final motion on the criteria? Would entertain a motion.
I'll move to find that the need for a variance is due to the unique circumstances of the property and not to the general conditions of the neighborhood.
Second.
Gary seconded. Thank you. Discussion on this particular item? I think the only argument that could be made for this one is that due to the location of the wetlands on this lot, which are unique circumstances on this particular lot, there are a couple places that a house could be located. One would be where it was originally shown in the application, right? And then one, you could squeeze it between the setback and the wetland that's shown on that little map. It looks to me by scale that it would fit, but maybe that's the thing that, you know, when you're trying to stay off the wetland up front, that's what shoved it forward. So that would be my 2 cents worth, and I'll probably vote that it is due to the unique circumstances of the property and not the general conditions of the neighborhood. Okay.
I just want to make sure I understand. So, because I'm taking notes as we're going, so that we can hopefully,
Yeah.
you know, I want to avoid having you have another meeting
Yep.
to adopt a written decision. So I can certainly do it tonight.
Yep.
Is what they're requesting is a 6-foot variance, I believe, is what the request is. So is the
Because they want to put a porch on the front of it, I believe.
right?
Is that the answer, Scott?
So
Yes.
is it the board's view that there's something unique about the property that makes it so that the house cannot be located in compliance with the setback?
I don't think it's the board's view on anything. I think my personal opinion was that I think it can be located. I think there could have been a building located on that lot
Okay,
that didn't encroach on the setbacks.
right.
Okay? I believe what was shown in the plan says that. But when you read this, that the need for the variance, when they moved the building to the front of the lot, they needed to stay off the wetland that would be behind it, and so they pushed it forward. Now, I understand what you're getting at. I don't necessarily disagree. I'm torn on both sides of it, because I think, yes, if they had gone, just like Mr. Sterling said, if they'd gone with the original plan, they meet the setbacks. Done. So it's not by force that they had to put the building there, but when they decided to move it forward, I think the wetland, to try to stay off the wetland, is what forced them into the setback, my opinion.
So I have a question for Mark.
Sure.
So this one's a little vague. It's been a while. This is contrasting the circumstances of the property in question to the general conditions of the neighborhood. To me, this is, I know it's part of what we need to decide on, but this covers a situation that I don't think exists here, like the general conditions in the neighborhood, looking at the map that was provided, there are a few other houses and lots. And so to me, the property as planned fits the general conditions of the neighborhood.
Yeah, I mean,
So what are we trying to get at?
what this standard is getting at is there something about the property itself that makes it impossible to meet the setback requirement? Is there, you know, the example I always use is most of the property covered in ledge, except for the part that encroaches on the setback, you know? And so if the only place on this lot that you can put a house, a single-family dwelling, is in this tiny little area that's not covered by ledge or whatever the other condition may be, that's not the same as the rest of the neighborhood, you know, there's this unique lot that's sort of, or maybe the lot's like odd shaped, you know, it's like a misshapen lot that, like, you know, comes to a point at one end, you know, and so it's this odd thing that really can't meet the setback because of the way that it comes to a point or something like that. That's what this is getting at. It's sort of saying that, you know, generally, you know, when the zoning ordinance was written, it took into account what the neighborhood looked like, right? And so, but it may not have taken into account a particularly unique property within that neighborhood, you know, that no one was really thinking of when they drew the setback lines, you know, that there's no way to put a house with that much ledge on it or something like that. But that's what I'm trying to get at is, you know, if I'm trying to understand if there is a spot on the property where this can go without a variance, how the standard is met. And that's what I'm just trying to get the reasoning out of the board on.
So I would read it the other way. If we leave out the unique circumstances, I would just say that the need for a variance is not due to the general conditions of the neighborhood. If you just kind of read it that way to start with, right? I mean, leave out the other part. The need for the variance really has nothing to do with the rest of the neighborhood, in my opinion, right? So,
That's fine.
That one, I think we could all say, yeah, it meets that standard. The need for the variance isn't due to the rest to the circumstances in the neighborhood, right? Now, the piece that you have to then read into, in my opinion, would be the need for the variance is due to the unique circumstances of the property, right? It's almost like they could have broken that into two pieces, right? So if the need for the variance is due to the unique circumstances of the property, then we meet that. If the need for the variance is not due to the unique circumstances of the property, and that's where I made what I think is the only argument that you could make, and again, I'm not saying I agree with it or disagree with it, but the argument that I see is that the only thing that pushed it into the setback in the front was because they were trying to avoid the wetland that's directly behind where the house is now located. I'm not saying that's correct. I'm just saying I don't see any other circumstance other than a straight up mistake, which it seems like we've already talked about, that pushed it into the setback.
Yeah, well, all I heard was they decided to abandon the duplex concept and go to a single family and wanted to avoid 100 whatever number of feet driveway and move it forward. So I don't think the variance had anything to do with the property characteristics.
Understood.
I think there's evidence in the record that that the variance is not due to the unique circumstances of the property, because they had a plan already in place and abandoned it. So I agree with you.
I mean, the way this is worded is just a pain in the butt, because it says the unique property and not to the general conditions of the neighborhood. So, yeah.
I don't take that you blew my argument out of the water personal at all, just so we're clear, right? I just wanted to, I mean, like, that's the only thing I could see that might have affected that, and I was just trying to bring it forward for discussion, so, yeah. So it's not, yeah. So any further discussion before we have a vote? So all in favor that the need for the variance is due to the unique circumstances of the property and not to the general conditions of the neighborhood? One vote. All opposed? Oop, the other five. So essentially, now we need one motion on the entire variance. And I think it's obvious at this point what the motion needs to be, since essentially the standard is 2 of these criteria failed. If only one of them had failed, it's still the same conclusion, because you have to meet all 4 criteria. So I would entertain a motion at this point.
I'll move to approve the variance.
A second on that?
Second.
Okay, so we have a motion to approve the variance. Any discussion at all? All in favor of approving the variance? All opposed? Now, I will say